desludge this approximately every 10 years. And the last desludging for Kāeo was done in 2018, and it removed approximately 115 tons of dry solids. So from the oxidation pond, the wastewater flows to a break tank before going into what works as a biofilter at number 3. So the biofilter is a 20 by 20 meter square that is 1 meter deep and made of a gravel-like media, which has a biofilm surface attached to it. As the wastewater trickles through the biofilter, it gets captured and degrades, and the pollutants get captured, and they get degraded over time. The treated wastewater at the bottom of this filter, at number 3, is then collected before being pumped up to number 4, which is the UV, ultraviolet treatment here. And so what the UV disinfection system does is that it mimics the natural process that sunlight provides by destroying the DNA of harmful microorganisms like bacteria and viruses. From here, the wastewater is discharged into the Kāeo River, and it follows a path of about 700 meters of pipe to get there. So you'll notice that I've also labeled a 5 and a 6, which are in red. So this is part of the treatment plant, but not part of the treatment process. So number 5 is the constructed wetlands, which is no longer being used. Has been used infrequently since the UV disinfection chamber was installed. At present, it is not being used because of preferential quality of the wastewater direct from the UV chamber. So with monitoring indicating that elevated fecal coliforms and ammonia levels were in discharge if it passed through the constructed wetland, so it was actually degrading the quality of the water if it goes through there. Multiple attempts have been made to replant the wetlands over the past 10 years, but none have proven successful. Number 6 is a stormwater storage pond. So during high flows, when there is a lot of rainfall in particular, the excess in the oxidation pond at number 2 is overflows into number 6 pond. And then once we return to regular flows through the treatment plant, the stormwater storage pond will slowly be reintroduced to the oxidation pond, so that goes through the full treatment process. Currently, this is being done with a temporary manual pump, but we are looking to introduce a permanent pump in the future. So as I said, the discharge is currently to the Kāeo River, and we approximately, on average, have a flow of 140 cubic meters every day that comes out of the pond. On a dry day with no rain, this is usually less than that, so it's more on the line of 60 cubic meters per day if there is no rain. So in terms of monitoring, the monitoring of water quality in the Kāeo River is carried out at least one occasion each calendar month at sites located upstream and downstream of the discharge point. And this is done between 3 and 7 hours after high tide, so that the effects of being so close to the sea don't throw out the sampling that's done. We also monitor the wastewater as it leaves the UV as the final point of treatment before discharge from the plant. Now, in terms of compliance, in general, the Kāeo Wastewater Treatment Plant has performed as designed and we are continuously compliant to NRC's wastewater treatment standards in the main. The one measurement where we are not consistently compliant is F-specific bacteriophage. So F-specific bacteriophage infect host bacteria, such as viral pathogens and fecal contaminants. And sorry if you aren't familiar with these words, do ask the question. I'm happy to go through them with you. So yeah, the F-specific bacteriophage infect those host bacteria, and as such are used to indicate viral contamination in waterways. So by detecting the F-specific bacteriophage, we're also detecting those pathogens and fecal contaminants. And so at the moment, we aren't being consistently compliant with that. And so so if we've established that the F-specific bacteriophage levels are the issue, how does FNDC plan to address this? Well, we're still waiting on some reports back on the process, which make up the application for the resource consent renewal, and that will help us determine what exactly needs to be done. However, we have done a performance review of the plant, and that is suggesting that the amount of suspended solids that are making its way through the trickling filter and through the UV is meaning that the UV isn't able to do its job at 100% efficiency. So the bacteria is able to essentially hide behind the suspended solids and not be treated as well as we'd hope. So in order to tackle that, the initial thinking is to either add additional solids filtration step between what you can see on the screen, the biofilter, the trickling filter, and the UV, which is up to the sort of left top of the picture there, which will help decrease the suspended solids and mean that the UV can do its job as it should. Other options are to also upgrade the biofilter, such as improving the distribution arm, increasing the filter depth so that it's filtered more, and then also there could be work done on the UV itself as well to improve it. So those are the sorts of things that we're thinking about at this stage. I just wanted to run that through with you. And then finally, we have sort of a picture of the discharge point. So you can see there at where the arrow is pointing, and that then flows out into the Whangaroa harbour. So hopefully that has given you a good picture of the current performance of the Kāeo Wastewater Treatment Plant. Please do speak up or raise your hand if you have any questions. But if there's nothing, then I'll hand it off to Martell, who can go through the resource consenting process. You're on mute, Martell.
Thanks, Ben. Kia ora, thanks for that, Ben. Right, tēnā koutou katoa. Hello all, good evening. So before I begin on the update on the consent renewal process, I just wanted to reiterate how much we appreciate having you all here to listen in on the treatment process, the resource consent renewal and the discharge to land projects that we currently have underway. Again, please don't hesitate to use the raise hand or chat options to ask questions of us at any time. Now I see that there are some familiar faces on this webinar, so they are familiar and they have heard probably some of what we're going to present on tonight. So we thank you as well for being here tonight and coming with us on the journey so far. So with that being said, I'll now jump into the consent renewal process. Right, just bear with me, team. My technology is taking a little bit of time.
That's all good, Martell. I'm just bringing in a latecomer. We've got Bronwyn joining us. Kia ora, Bronwyn. Welcome.
Kia ora, aroha mai for being late.
I'm getting the dreaded blue circle of revolving.
What?
I can take back control, Martell, and I'll just take you through the slides. As you need.
My notes aren't coming up.
Oh,
Paddy,
right.
I see you have a question.
Yes, who's that? Ben. Is there is the Ben the one that ran us through that the last?
Yeah.
Yeah. So is there any way we can up lives? Because how many people are on this system at the moment?
There's about 240 connections in Kāeo.
Yeah. So is there any way this can be upsized to, because what's happening is only a bit of our sewage is going into here, isn't it? All the rest is going pretty much out of town and up to another private one up the back. So is there any chance of upgrading this so that we get more households in there?
Yep.
Because at the moment it's only serving Kāeo and Whangaroa, eh?
Yeah, it's serving Kāeo and then also getting wastewater from Whangaroa, which is trucked at the moment.
Yep.
Yep.
So yeah, I was just seeing if there's any plans with the new upgrade to supply more houses to it.
Yeah. So can you speak on that, or do you want me to?
I can, Ben.
Oh, Helen. Yep. Cheers.
Kia ora, my name is Helen Ronaldson. I'm part of this team as well. There is no current plan to upgrade this particular treatment plant. So Stephen, if you've got concerns about the area that's being considered at the moment, it might be an idea to put something in writing to us. I'm not sure how much more you would want to see connected.
Well, I'd like the whole lot to be in there, actually, just quietly.
When you say the whole lot, though, what does that mean?
Well, I think all the septic tanks and all the houses aren't emptied into there. It's only Whangaroa and Kāeo. So,
Yes.
So where does all our other crap go? We'd send it over to Kerry or something. We export it. So,
the on-site septic systems would have their own either discharge through land, depending on what sort of system they've got, or they would be trucked out.
Yeah, well, they are just, the water is discharged to land, but the solids are picked up by a truck and taken away to, we did have a consent to, you guys gave a consent to us to allow one up in Waihapa, sorry. There's a settling pond up there that they use for all these other septic tanks.
True.
So we disagreed with that one as well, because they were taking out the sludge and just dumping it on the land next to it, and they were drip feeding all the water from it onto the land right next to it as well, because our main objective is to try and stop contaminants getting into our harbour, because as you know, Māoris tend to go fishing and picking pippies and oysters and all that kind of carry on out there. So,
For sure.
so the less contaminants we can get in our harbour, the better we like it.
Absolutely.
And
Councillor Stratford, you've got your hand up.
I'm just listening to Ben. He's saying the water's going in there. It ain't exactly pure enough to be going in the creek as well. So and we only got 250 houses on there. So
Yes.
yeah, we're going to have a bit of an issue here.
Kia ora, Stephen. It's Kelly Stratford. I asked the very same question a month ago or so. Whilst there is capacity, the session tonight is focused mainly on the upgrades necessary for this resource consent to be renewed, and for us to connect up the other properties around Kāeo or further afield. We need to do up a submission to that LTP process to get pipes funded, because the consent conversation doesn't stretch to expanding the area of benefit at this stage. But I know from your previous conversations we've had initially that it's been an aspiration for the community to extend that area of benefit, but council's not paying for that at this stage, or your rates aren't going to stretch that far at this stage. But in the future, it could. Kia ora, Stephen.
Yeah, this guy's just told us that it's not very well treated going in there now. So, and you want us to say yay to it. So, as a runanga would probably be opposing it at the moment because of the quality of the water that's going in it already. And like I said, that river.
Perhaps Ben needs to speak to that point about the treatment of the water, because there was Kāeo is performing better than any of the other plants. He just might need to go over that treatment again.
Yeah. So sorry, Stephen. The plant itself, in terms of performance, is performing generally really, really well. It's just one area which we're looking to improve, and it's not like it's constantly non-compliant. It's just an issue, particularly in certain seasons of the year where we get high algae in the oxidation pond, which means we get more solids going through, which protects the bacteria when it leads through the UV. And so it's just a matter of increasing the filtration before the UV, so that we can cut out those suspended solids and allow the UV to do its job. So in general, the plant itself, the performance of it, is keeping with the high standards that NRC put in place for compliance. And it's just a minor improvement that we need to make in order to address this issue. And it's just for those sort of seasonal points where we're non-compliant with F-specific bacteriophage. So sorry if it came across that it was all doom and gloom as such.
Ben, we've got a question from Kim Hammond. Is there a way to stop the discharge from going to our harbour? Just up the road from the discharge is a swimming hole. You check once a month for contamination levels, but over summer locals swim in there on the daily. Is this safe? Just up the road from the discharge. So is that upstream or downstream, Kim?
Kia ora. It's upstream from the discharge. So it's the swimming hole that locals use is just off Dip Road.
Right.
In the river there.
Yep.
So okay.
Yeah. I mean, all of
I think, excuse me, Ben, if I may, Kim, I have a few updates in my slide with regards to some of the studies that we've had completed with regards to receiving water quality. would that potentially, that may fill some gaps for you?
Thank you.
But I will let Ben actually answer the question about the wetlands though.
Yeah, the question is, could locals have access to the wetland to try and revitalise it?
Maybe I could help there, Ben.
Yeah, that would be good.
So, kia ora, my name's Melissa Parlane. I am a asset manager at the Far North District Council, and I've been at the council for about 11 years and worked on the biofilter upgrade a number of years ago. At that time, we were working with YCare and some members of the community, and we used their services, so engaged directly with members of the community to replant the wetland, and that was a second replant after the first one didn't work out. So that was with some local cabbage trees, some local flax, and it didn't take. We have a real issue with pukekos coming in and pulling out all the plants. It's quite a shallow wetland. So I think we've tried 3 times to replant the wetland unsuccessfully, and I don't know that we're ready to give up, but we'd certainly want to see we want to see some noted benefits from it, because right now the cleanest water that we're seeing from the treatment plant is right out of the UV when all the bugs are dead, and all the bacteria is kind of killed off by the UV plant, and the wastewater is from a Western science perspective as clean as it can be. But yeah, I think we're open to it, but I just want to give you a bit of history that the community have been involved previously in trying to replant the wetland.
Does that answer your question there, Kim?
Yes, no, it certainly does. Thank you.
So is the water hole safe to swim in? It was one of the questions.
Yeah, Paddy, I did mention that I would cover that off with my update on the studies that we've had conducted.
Should we jump back into the presentation and see if some of the questions are answered along the way?
Yeah, would that be okay with everyone? Cool, I'll take that as a unanimous yes. Right, I'm going to turn my camera back on. All right, so kicking back off, I'm managing the resource consent renewal on behalf of the Far North District Council. So I'll give you a quick run through on what that's looking like currently. So discharges to the environment are restricted or duty bound under the Resource Management Act. As such, Far North District Council holds resource consents that authorise, subject to conditions, the discharge of wastewater to the Kāeo River during normal flow operations, alongside permits to discharge wastewater to land via seepage from the base of the ponds and the constructed wetlands when they are in operation, and to discharge odours to air at the treatment plant. So these resource consents will expire on the 31st of October this year, and as such, new resource consents are required to be able to continue to lawfully operate the community wastewater facility at Kāeo. So an application for the new resource consents will need to be lodged with Northland Regional Council no later than July this year. Now, this time frame requirement is a requirement under the RMA for replacement applications, hence why it's a specific month there. Right, so our replacement application. Our application for replacement must contain the information required of it under the Resource Management Act. So this includes a comprehensive assessment of environmental effects and an assessment of the proposal against relevant policies and plans, like the National Policy Statement for Freshwater, the Regional Policy Statement for Northland, and the proposed Regional Plan for Northland. So we've started the process of preparing the application early to ensure we meet the information requirements under the RMA. So with the comprehensive assessment of environmental effects to prepare, we've commissioned various technical experts to assist us. These include expert review of the performance of the wastewater treatment process at the plant, a desktop review of studies undertaken on the quality of the waters of the Kāeo River and the Whangaroa Harbour, as well as modelling of the risks to human health from microorganisms in the wastewater, and a risk assessment of floodwaters on the wastewater treatment plant. So with the information obtained from their work, our team will be planning the next steps to improve the treatment process to ensure that the health and mauri of the receiving waters are maintained or enhanced. So jumping from that slide, the maintenance of the quality of fresh water is the current minimum expectation of the National Policy Statement for Fresh Water and the proposed regional plan. Enhancement of the quality of fresh water is also directed by the policies of these documents, where freshwater quality standards are being exceeded, or in other words, where the health and well-being of water is degraded. In order to achieve the maintenance and enhancement of fresh water when considering resource use and development, the NPS, or National Policy Statement for Fresh Water, applies a concept of te mana o te wai, guided by the principles of kaitiakitanga, mana whakahaere, and manaakitanga. So under the construct of the National Policy Statement, these principles are described as preserving, restoring, or enhancing water for the benefit of present and future generations, making decisions that maintain, protect, and sustain the health and well-being of water, and that water and the traditional mātauranga relating to its use and spiritual importance are respected. So as an application for replacement consent, our application must contain measures such as proposed conditions, which will result in the quality of the discharge being improved over the term of the consent to reduce the contribution of the discharge to the exceedance of a water quality standard, and must set out time-bound steps on how the activity will be managed to achieve the water quality improvements proposed. The proposed regional plan also directs that the Northern Regional Council must not grant resource consent to Far North District Council to discharge municipal wastewater to water unless a discharge to land has been considered and found not to be environmentally, economically, or practicably viable. Now, my colleague Ben is going to be going through the investigations he has been managing, which looks into a discharge of the Kāeo wastewater to land next. So jumping back into our resource consent renewal, from the studies we've had conducted, we know that there have been exceedances of freshwater standards for median concentrations of ammoniacal nitrogen, dissolved oxygen, and fecal indicator bacteria, like E. coli. So this was from a desktop analysis undertaken of the water quality of the Kāeo River. However, from the spatial distribution of the monitored sites, we know that bugs like E. coli are at demonstrably elevated levels above the wastewater discharge point, and that source tracking of these bugs has identified that their primary origin are from fecal waste from ruminants like cows, sheep. So with regards to ammoniacal nitrogen, we will be looking at the treatment process and how we can reduce the concentration of it in the wastewater when discharged. We will also be investigating a source of contamination that was observed by the expert above the wastewater discharge site. One other aspect of the National Policy Statement for Freshwater that will be hugely important in the near future is the compulsory requirement for regional councils to have developed freshwater plans with their communities, tangata whenua, and stakeholders. These freshwater plans must be notified by 31 December 2024 under the RMA. So I really wanted to emphasise that there is I guess another freshwater reform package coming up for catchment specific plans that the community stakeholders, tangata whenua, including Whānau District Council, will have to be involved with as well. So just wanted to, I guess, package that all up under the discussion on Te Mano Te Wai, or the National Policy Statement for Freshwater. I'm just going to take a pause just to see if there are any questions that might have popped up over that part of the presentation. If not, I'll keep rolling on. No, all good. Cool. Right. So hopefully you can see this timeline. It's pretty condensed. We had to fit quite a lot in on the one page. So this is a really short snapshot of our timeline for our resource consent replacement. So our timeline on the consent replacement started last year when we had Jacobs Engineering Group carry out the process and performance review of the wastewater treatment plant. So their review concluded that with recommendations to improve aspects of the treatment process, the discharge would not exceed the consented limits currently. So part of our work at the moment is looking into their recommendations. So since the performance review, we have been concentrating on engaging with our partners, tangata whenua, stakeholders, and the community. However, by May this year, the application for resource consent, including the comprehensive assessment of environmental effects, will need to be at a point where it can be completed to then lodge with the Northern Regional Council by the beginning of July. So the reason why we want to lodge the application at the beginning of July is because once it is lodged, the Regional Council has 10 working days to decide whether to accept it or not. And this is a matter of whether it is considered a complete application or not. So if it's not considered to be complete, the Regional Council can actually kick it back to us. They can reject it. So we want to lodge it at the beginning of July. So should it be rejected, we have time to address the issues that Regional Council might have. And then we can relodge it in time to meet that end of July deadline, which is again a statutory deadline in the RMA. So once the application is accepted in around about the July period, the Regional Council then decides if it has enough information to assess the effects of the activity on the environment. Now, if it requires more information, the application is placed on hold while we gather the necessary information to respond to their information requests. The amount of time it could be placed on hold for is really dependent on the nature of their questions. Some questions can be relatively easy to answer, whereas others may require extra work to complete that may need a bit of time to complete. Again, the reason why we've started early and we've had our experts on board early is to make sure that we don't have those further information requests. So with our application, if we don't have any further information requests, we are proposing that our application is publicly notified. So this enables anyone to have their say on the proposal. Now, Regional Council will decide when the notification happens, but once they do notify it, you can make a submission within 20 working days of it being notified. So jumping on to that point, what we will update you on is both with regards to the, I guess, the submission process or the notification, We will be keeping our webpage and social media up to date with news and progress of the renewal application, including posting a copy of the resource consent application and any other documents or links which may be useful. And we will be using that as a tool, I guess a secondary tool to Northern Regional Council's notification avenues as well. Cool. So that brings to a close my presentation for the night, and happy to take any questions. Kim, I might go back to your question on the water quality at that swimming hole. Did you happen to hear the, I guess that the information that we found with regards to water quality in the Kāeo River?
Sorry, Kim, Martell Kim has left the webinar.
Oh, she is.
But we can provide a response and follow up with her.
Oh, she said she did, so that's good. Cool.
She's back.
Oh, it's come back.
Yeah, she is.
Okay, well, I'll let her ask the question then.
Oh, she said in the chat, she said it did, thank you. But happy to take a query, Paddy.
Yeah, just around that, the water quality, is there a warning, say, like if it goes above, like Ben was saying that sometimes it does go above, is there a warning size, so like a warning put out to the people that use the swimming holes that it's maybe contaminated?
Yeah, no, that is definitely a gap there, because I mean, one of the things that we didn't know is that there is a swimming hole. We have assumed recreational value for the Kāeo River, but I guess the separation distance of that swimming hole would be really good for us to know, so that when we're having our I guess experts assess the risk of the wastewater to the receiving waters, we can so as an example, our the qualitative microbial risk assessment that we're having done that looks at bugs in the wastewater and how they will move within that receiving environment and their concentrations. We have mainly looked at the downstream environment and looked at points of interest, including in the harbour where the oyster farms are. So we've got some, I guess they're called stations within the modelling to see what our where the bugs might travel to based on the hydrodynamic model and the concentrations of those at those points. So it would be good to know where that swimming hole is to see if we have it in that modelling assessment.
Well, they're in the high tide. The first one's about 100 metres from your point of discharge, and the other one's about another 50 metres further up. One by the Omani Bridge, and one beside the old fish factory there, well, right on the corner.
Okay.
So they're pretty close, and the tide does go up that way. So if anything comes out of on the incoming tide, it'll get pushed up that way.
Yeah, and that's why we've got conditions on the consent about the timing of the discharge, so that it doesn't back up into the river environment.
Okay, so it's only at low tide you discharge, or tide going out?
On the outgoing tide, so it's not low tide, it's on the outgoing tide.
Okay. I had another question. How long was this consent for?
So for the new consent or the old one?
The new one.
Or the new one.
Yes.
We're looking at the consent duration at the moment. There's a few factors to consider around that, including obviously we want to hear from the community about their expectations of consent duration. Obviously, the longer the consent duration, the more security we have about the ability to lawfully operate a wastewater treatment system for Kāeo. But again, one of the factors that we have to account for is also the discharge to land project that we're looking at. And we do have some reforms in the way as well with regards to our Three Waters infrastructure and management that we're mindful or cognizant of as well.
Thank you. Oh, maybe. Oh, sorry, somebody else.
I was just going to say, we've got a question from Bronwyn in the chat. Does climate change mitigations, I guess, are they taken into account, and is there a shorter period for the consent? Oh, potentially. Is climate change taken into consideration in the application, Martell?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I might just clarify on that with you, Bronwyn, if possible. Is that with regards to flood risk, inundation, or flows? Sea level rise. So, yeah, in terms of that's with our flood inundation risk looks at sea level rise from a a hydraulic perspective. So our wastewater discharge pipe is within the bed of so we've got potentially a few scenarios there. We've got the hydraulic issues that might occur as a result of sea level rise. So the ability to be able to discharge at the level that the pipe is set at in the riverbed. And we've also looking at the flood risk of the treatment plant where it currently is located. It is raised off of that floodplain and currently sits outside of the modelled flood hazard areas. Is that? Sorry guys, I'm just reading the chat at the moment. I think right, yes. Bronwyn's confirmed that answers her question. Happy to follow up with you, Bronwyn, in more detail.
So is there a maintenance program for the plants as well, being the number 2 and number 3? So that you take all those stones out and replace them. I heard something about you maybe going to dig it another meter deeper and fill it up with more stones and stuff. So is there a regular maintenance of those? So like, do you desludge the number 2 once every year, every 10 years, or etc.?
Yeah, no, that's a good question, Paddy. And the process review report contains a good summary of the sludge removal. But I might ask Mel actually, as our 11-year, 10-year asset manager here.
Yeah, happy to respond. I'm sure Ben would know the answers, but yeah, so we have regular desludging program for all of our ponds. It's not, they don't accumulate quickly, those large ponds, so we don't expect to have to desludge them any more than about every 10 years. So we'll be monitoring the sludge levels in the oxidation pond. The biofilter with the rocks, again, minimal maintenance required on a kind of day-to-day basis, but we need to make sure that the arms that distribute the water are working properly and not blocked in any way. So that's something that the operators who are on site multiple times a week check that the water is being spread across the filter appropriately. The rocks themselves, that biofilm that Ben mentioned, does build up and then starts to slough off if it gets too thick, and that will contribute to our suspended solids. So that does have a life. This is a new kind of bespoke design, and we're learning as we go with this piece of equipment. I think the time is nearing that the media needs to be pulled out and replaced. The bed of the filter is quite a high-tech, expensive liner, so I don't think we would be looking at digging it any deeper, but it's pretty simple to remove the gravel and replace it with clean gravel. Yeah, and then over in the UV unit, that's a pretty high-tech piece of equipment which can kind of send us alarms if anything's not going correctly, but the only kind of regular piece of maintenance that's required there is cleaning of the lamp and replacement of the lamp, which is just a high-tech light bulb, really, really powerful. So all our pump stations are monitored through SCADA, so we can see the water levels, and if things aren't going right, we can get on site. But yeah, that's kind of a general overview. Have I missed anything, Ben?
That just about covers it up. Yeah, so our operators have a maintenance plan that they stick to, as Mel was alluding to, which also includes, like, you know, even keeping up to date with like housekeeping, sort of making sure the grass is mowed and the fencing is appropriate, things like that.
Yeah, that's more important than you think, really, keeping that grass level down. On a more consistent basis, they need to check the screens are operating properly and clear them out and take the rubbish out from the screens. That's probably the highest input, is at the front of the wastewater treatment plant, making sure that that screen is operating correctly and that the waste is disposed of correctly.
Thanks, guys. We've got a question in the chat from Catherine. The stormwater pond looked full in the photo. Should consecutive events flood the stormwater pond, what would untreated wastewater potentially be released into the river? And if so, will this be looked into with the improved design? And thank you, Catherine, for the compliment on the presentation. Who would like to pick that one up?
Do you want to have first crack, Ben?
Oh, I was actually going to say Martell, because I believe
okay,
she talked about this before. Martell?
Yes, I will turn all my busy nose back on. Right, so yes, that was a great observation, actually. Yeah, the management of the levels of the ponds are quite crucial to managing untreated overflows. And saying that, though, there are situations where we do have unprecedented, well, what probably was unprecedented, but is now becoming more of a reality for us these days. And that is very high rainfall events that do result in what we call emergency overflow discharges. The current consent allows for those events, and one of the primary reasons being that at the point in time where we would have to discharge in those emergency situations, the catchment or the receiving catchment is in a state of what you would call high contaminant load anyway. There is that, but also that the wastewater itself is highly diluted for the fact that it's primarily rainwater that is being discharged, but we're definitely under no illusion that there is wastewater included in those emergency discharges.
Does that answer your question, Catherine?
Yes, thank you.
Any more questions?
Okay, then I'll get on to the next part of our presentation, which is all about the discharge to land investigations that we have started. We started these sort of in the second half of last year. So but first we'll get into why investigate discharge the land. So the first, there's four main reasons. The first of which is cultural, as per policies in the Te Runanga o Whangaroa iwi resource management plan, such as no discharge to water, including the discharge of treated effluent to water, as noted, and the community plan also echoes this. So we know there is a general want to head in the direction of getting the wastewater out of our waterways. Environmentally, taking is a similar situation where you're taking wastewater out of the waterways altogether, and they are introduced to further natural filtration process as it is discharged through the land as well. From a regulatory point of view, as Martell pointed out earlier, the proposed regional plan from NRC for Northland requires that discharge to water consent and not be generally granted unless discharge to land has been assessed and found to not be environmentally, economically, or practicably viable. And the last one is the end use opportunity. So there is potential to use the treated wastewater for things like irrigation, as it provides nutrients for plant growth. So what is discharge to land? Well, there's numerous different ways that treated wastewater can be discharged to land. However, the one that best suits Kāeo is known as slow rate irrigation. This is due to the clay-like soils in Kāeo that mean alternative methods such as rapid infiltration are not possible. So rapid infiltration, for example, requires a very sandy, high drainage soils. Unfortunately, though, in Kāeo, and in fact, most of the Far North District, we have clay-like soils, which means we aren't able to get the same level of drainage as you might get elsewhere in New Zealand. So slow rate irrigation is the most used method across New Zealand and applies treated wastewater across a large area of vegetated surface. The vegetated land acts as further treatment as the plants use the nutrients in the wastewater to grow. The application of slow rate irrigation can be spray, as shown in the picture before you on the right. That's in a forest in Rotorua, and is the cheaper option. Or it can be done through subsurface drip, so or below ground drippers, and that is generally used when it needs to be, or in closer proximity to human activity. Not to say that it would be done, close to residential areas. We want to keep away from that as much as possible, but it is obviously less hazardous to health and safety if we're introducing the wastewater beneath ground as opposed to spray, where you can get some spray drift. It does require a large land area though, but that land can be used to produce products from the end use to offset part of the costs, as has been done in other parts of New Zealand. And getting into that, I'll now talk about some possible end uses. So before you on the screen, on the left is an example of an irrigation setup and by the Manawatu District Council that you can go and see on their website, the Manawatu District Council website. And on the right, you have an example of a cut and carry operation. So the Taupo District Council holds 200 hectares of land, which operates a cut and carry operation using treated wastewater for irrigation. So when they sell this cut and carry as animal feed, they need to package it with a separate color. So I think they use a green to recognize that it comes from treated wastewater. But the proceeds they get from this helps to offset the yearly maintenance costs of running the discharge to land operation. And they've actually outsourced the cut and carry operation now as well. So it's created some jobs as well, which is always a good thing. So as I said, we've sort of approached discharge to land in Kāeo at the sort of tail end of last year, where we conducted a desktop analysis to find out if discharge to land was practicably and economically viable in Kāeo. And the picture before you sort of shows a red dot in the middle, which is the Kāeo Wastewater Treatment Plant, and then a ring around it, the blue ring, which represents 5 kilometers in radius. And that we limited ourselves to 5 kilometers because the further out you get, the higher the cost. Piping, unfortunately, is not cheap. And so we want to keep that within a 5 kilometer radius if we can. So in this assessment, we take into account things like soil drainage, flood land, slope, the total area of an individual piece of land that we can get, and various other things as well. And we also use we calculated the minimum amount of area that we would need, and so we only consider things that meet that land requirement, and that is 28 hectares. So that's to give you a grasp of how much area you actually need to discharge the land for Kāeo, and that is taking into account future flows, a buffer zone. So if we were to use spray, the spray drift wouldn't be an issue because you have that buffer area, and also a storage pond, and that's to account for those high rainfall events when we wouldn't be discharging to land, because if you get flooding or high rainfall, it could lead to runoff of the wastewater, and that is something we definitely want to avoid if possible. So based on this assessment, we found that there were numerous sites that were large enough to take on the treated wastewater. And we then conducted an economic analysis on one of those sites to give us an estimate. So this estimate did not include any potential upgrades at the plants that might be necessary, or the purchasing of any land. So it is definitely a low-end estimate, and that was 6.2 million. So to give you an idea of the cost, it is not a small cost. And at present, wastewater upgrades such as this are funded by targeted rates, meaning the cost would be paid for by those connected to the Kāeo Wastewater Treatment Plant. And as we sort of talked about earlier, in Kāeo, there's only sort of 240 connections, meaning that the full impact of that will be felt on those ratepayers, and that will mean that there will be likely more than $1,000 rating impact increase per year per ratepayer. Using the bill report, which assesses the affordability of rates across the Whanau district in 2020, we sort of added on this impact to see if it would be affordable, and what we found was that it wouldn't be. based on their requirements. So anything above 5% of the average salary for various household types means it is unaffordable for those household types, and for 6 out of 8 household types. So there's just things like single parent with kids versus 2 parents with kids who are both working, for instance. And the only ones that were still affordable was 2 parents who were both working. In all other situations, it was deemed as unaffordable. And so when we reported to council on this, we said that economically discharge to land is not currently a viable option, as it is unaffordable to the ratepayers of Kāeo. However, we did acknowledge that with the Free Waters reform on the way, there is the possibility that the funding mechanism changes, so it stops being a targeted rate, and that would potentially make it economically viable if it was spread out further. And so we have highlighted that we will continue to investigate discharge to land by getting to a preferred site that is agreed upon by council as well as the community and the runanga, to make sure that the site is culturally appropriate as well. And once we get, so I'll jump into that stage. Yeah, so the next steps for the discharge to land project is that staff undertake that initial engagement with mana whenua and affected landowners to determine the best possible site. And then we, should we get to that stage, staff will then develop a project plan and request additional funding to undertake on-site testing to make sure that the desktop analysis that we did was right before we do a concept design, and that will give us a much firmer grasp on the actual cost of discharge to land, so that in the future, if it does become economically viable, we don't have to wait around for that work to be done, and it helps get us on the right track faster. But if anyone has any questions on that, please feel free to raise them now.
We've got one just popped up from Bronwyn. Was there also potentially an impact on those ratepayers within the area of benefit, e.g. their contribution to public good? I'm not sure that I understand that question. Bronwyn, do you want to switch on your mic and explain further?
Yeah. Oh, thanks. I guess it's about, for instance, there's public toilets within the urban centre of Kāeo, and so those need to be funded somehow in terms of, any capital works improvement or maintenance and all those sorts of things. So, normally I would assume that those ratepayers within a defined area of benefit could have their rates also tagged to obviously a much smaller amount, but be tagged to contribute towards, the cost of, release into land. Yeah, it was probably just a question more around, yeah. No, I was actually really interested.
I think Helen's probably the best one to answer that question, if that's okay, Helen.
About the public toilet?
About how they're funded.
The public toilets are funded through our district facilities area rather than our Three Waters space. So that there is, if you've ever had a look at the long-term plan that is published and put together, there is provision in there every year for either new public toilets or renewals to existing public toilets. So that is always included and the cost, that cost includes the operations. So we have capital costs and we also have operational costs every year for those, but they're handled within our district facilities group rather than the Three Waters group. But yes, the public toilets in Kāeo do feed into the disposal into this wastewater treatment plant.
Thanks.
And
Helen.
I'm not 100% sure, but the term public good is one I've heard spoken about in council previously around wastewater funding, and that is to say that, like you highlight, Bronwyn, that everyone in the district, including visitors, benefits from our urban wastewater systems and the way that we collect and treat wastewater to a high standard and not pollute the environment. So, from my understanding, there's a portion of wastewater costs which are collected from the general rate, and but it's still very small, and our ratepayer base is still my children are yelling through the window because I've locked them out of my office. And I've lost my train of thought. I've got to go, I'm sorry. But yeah, generally there is some funding from outside, and but our ratepayer base is just so small and these costs are so high, and everyone in the far north wants to benefit from these systems. So it's a real challenge.
Thanks, Mel.
Thanks, Mel. We've got a question from Paddy.
Have there been any other alternatives been investigated, like solar, evaporation, maybe steaming it off, or anything else, or we just been going on this wastewater to land sort of thing?
At this stage, the alternative that we're looking at is, discharge to land. We haven't begun investigations into other possible methods.
Okay. Thank you.
Any more questions? Oh, Helen, sorry.
No, all good.
Oh, well, shall I move to the next slide? Great. Always makes you feel better when other people have children disasters when you're trying to work online. It's always such fun. Thank you so much for joining us at the webinar, or in the webinar tonight. We really appreciate that you've taken time out of your day to listen to the proposal on the Kāeo wastewater and the discharge to land in our consenting process. I appreciate it's a hard time of day with dinners and families. I had similar disasters as Mel this evening, so it's all just part of it. So really appreciate your time. So just to recap on the presentation tonight, the resource consent application will be lodged in July. When it is notified, it will be publicly notified, which means it will go out and everyone has the opportunity to make submissions. The discharge to land investigations will continue at a high level. And if you would like any further information or just to get in touch to get further information as the process goes on, please contact Martell or Ben. Their contact details are there. We'll also be keeping our website and social media updated. So that's another spot. We will also advertise there when it is notified. Just wondering if anyone has any final questions or comments.
Any feedback about timing of this webinar as well, if this is a suitable time for you all, or if there was a particular time in the week that you think would be better. Always keen to hear feedback on when that would be, so that we can get the best possible engagement going forward.
Yeah, that's right. And it's much easier when you're doing engagement in face to face, but the current environment makes it tricky. So we're all trying to adapt to this new way of working and new way of living. And it has its challenges at times. Yeah. But again, thank you. And any kind of feedback is good feedback. So please do get in touch. Thank you for your comment, Bronwyn. Right. Is Patrick still online?
Here he is.
Yes, I am. Kia ora. Thanks, Kim. Anei te mihi kia koutou nā kai kōrero I tēnei wā. Nō reira, e mihi hoki ki ngā kai ui mai ana. He mihi kia koutou katoa. So thank you to our presenters today for presenting what I believe, just sitting in the background, a fairly comprehensive presentation. But I want to thank those people who asked questions more, because that's what this is all about. This is about hearing what you want to talk about. So nā mihi kia koutou. Nō reira, I'll just finish off with a quick karakia to finish our evening, to clear us all ready for whatever it may be, whether it be kids coming through the door, the window, or whatever it may be. I've got muckles yelling in the background, so it's all good. Nō reira, anei te mihi kia koutou. Unu he ki tūru tapunui kia wātea, kia māma, te nākau, te tinana te wairu e te ara takatū. Kuera e rongo whakiriaki ki runga, kia wātea, aira, kia wātea, rire hau, pai marire. Kia ora everyone. I'll let someone from the team just say the final goodbyes. Kia ora.